Hello and welcome to Menopause, Marriage and Motherhood, a podcast that's all about changing the way we view midlife and bringing the conversation about menopause out into the open. Each week we share stories, experiences, tips and inspirations. We talk to experts on how to best navigate this time of life and how to have as much fun as we can. I'm your host, Karen O'Connor. Let's get right into it.
I'm here today with one of my favourite authors, Danielle Hawkins. Welcome, Danielle, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
So Danielle has written, how many books? 4 or 5? Is it 4 or 5?
5.
5 books now, and the last one I finished reading a few weeks ago is called Two Shakes of a Lamb's Tail. The other 4 are all novels set in her native New Zealand, but Two Shakes of a Lamb's Tail is actually based fairly closely around a year in her own life as a mother, a farmer's wife, a vet, and an author. I used to love reading James Herriot's It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet when I was little, and it really took me back to that stuff.
I love Grange Herriot too.
What made you change from novels to writing about your own, based upon your own life? What happened there?
I had an email from the publisher saying, you wouldn't like to write something true, would you? That stuff is selling really well. So that was all. I wasn't struck by an epiphany or anything like that. But it does make a very pleasant change actually being asked to do something, because, normally you produce this manuscript and sort of hand it over and hope. So, it was quite flattering having something requested.
How did you start writing?
I started doing it seriously when I had a small baby and I was at home from work, for the first time ever. And I had a lot of time. You know what it's like having babies. The time is fragmented, but there's not a whole lot of sort of real mental drain stuff. So for the first time I had lots of brain power to concentrate on a big project. And I started playing around, and I wrote the worst book in the history of the universe, but it was so much fun and it taught me so much. I got really hooked.
So how do you do it? Do you have an idea and then you start writing? Do you plan it out? How does it go?
I don't, and I really struggle with plot. It's definitely not a strength. I start with a person that I quite like and sort of wander along and see what happens to them, which does mean that nothing very much happens in a book that I write. But
and yet it does at the same time, because it's real life. Like, it lands to me like this could be somebody's life. It's not full of drama and incidents and everything. It's somebody's life.
Well, thank you. Yeah, one of my absolute pet peeves when I'm reading books, one of the things that really jars is like screeds of dialogue that you think, but no one would talk like that, but no one would say that. And yeah, so I do try hard to often I want something to happen and then I have to go, oh no, but he wouldn't do that. No, that person, no, they just wouldn't.
One of the things that I really like about your characters is gentle isn't quite the right word. I can relate to them a lot. They're very attractive kind of characters. I don't like anti-heroes. I think
neither do I. I just don't care enough. If the person's an arse, I just don't care.
No, I can't get into the book, and I
exactly.
like
They have to be a personal friend before you
can
get
yes, that's it. Yeah, I've got to be able to relate to them, and that's what I like. It's like, and I just want her to succeed in whatever she's doing.
Yeah, no, that's definitely my approach to books. And are you a rereader?
I am a rereader, yes.
Yeah.
I have to go through, and because I like to, if I get into a story, I'll read it very, very quickly.
Me too.
So
I miss most of it.
Yes. And then I need to go back and go, okay, what actually happened in several parts?
Yeah, that's right. But you've reassured yourself that you're going to like the person, so then you can invest.
That's it. That's the one. So it was really interesting that when I read your Two Shakes of a Lamb's Tail, I liked you. I went, oh, she's really nice. I'm going to get in touch with her.
Thank you. But I mean, of course, being the author, you have the license to make yourself slightly nicer, and always. When my husband read it, he was like, I don't remember all those arguments being quite like that. Oh, well, you write a book, darling.
Did he? I was going to ask you about that, because there were a few arguments, and I went, I would have slapped him around the head with a piece of 4x2 if he'd said that to me.
Only sometimes.
So talk to me about being a vet as well, because you've got your finger in so many pies in your life. I really struggle with compartmentalizing my life, but you seem to be able to do it. How do you do it?
Well, I like it, actually. I like having lots of different projects, because then when you don't feel like doing one of them, as you often don't, then there are 5 or 6 other things that you know are useful and valuable to do. So, yeah, it's good.
So do you
feel better about the procrastination?
Because you got something else to do.
Exactly.
Do you find it easy to swap from one thing to another?
Well, the vet thing is very easy, because I go to work on those days, and then I'm not home. I'm doing that. Yeah, and then everything else, the farming and the housework and stuff. That is all sort of one thing anyway. It's, just like anybody else, any other housewife or mother.
Yeah. I should probably ask you to give us a little bit of background about yourself, because I haven't actually said, Danielle, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and where you live and blah, blah, blah?
Oh, right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I live with my husband and 2 children. They're 10 and 13 on a sheep and beef farm, sort of halfway down the North Island of New Zealand. And I work 3 days a week as mostly a large animal vet, bits and pieces of other things. And I get to do all the stuff for the Otaronga Kiwi House. So that's good fun. And yeah, and then I come home and farm and garden and cook and, all those other rather dull things. And I've written, this is my 5th book. The writing, I tend to get up early and do that. And then at least you've done it when the day goes to pass later, as it inevitably does. Is it?
What made you want to become a vet?
James Herriot. Yeah.
Was it really?
Yeah, it really was. It really was. And I grew up on a farm and loved it, and always wanted to live in the country and be on a farm. But the actual farming always looked like far too much hard work to me. So it was the closest alternative I could come up with. And being a vet is wonderful, because you waft onto these different properties and you give all this sort of laborious, expensive, time-consuming advice, and then you waft off again. It's great.
So I know a few times in the book where you were talking about going to see to cows. It's heavy work, isn't it? A large animal vet is going seeing cows and sheep. You're not in the surgery looking after your little cats and dogs. This is heavy, hard work.
Occasionally, pregnancy testing season is hard. We pregnancy test big numbers, and it's right in the middle of summer, so it's hot, and you dress from head to toe in layers of plastic and rubber and plunge your arm deep into a nice warm cow, which is just not what you want in January. But everything, so that is a hard time of year, and you get home and you're tired. Everything else, not so much. We have very good drugs. You don't have to wrestle the 700 kilogram bull to the ground. You give it an injection and it sits down.
Where to from here with your books?
Well, the book that I'm writing slowly and laboriously at the moment is a different sort of a thing. If anybody ever wants to publish it, I suspect that they'd call it young adult fiction, about a princess. I wanted to write a fantasy, like a sort of a clever, carefully constructed world, sort of a Philip Pullman type thing. But unfortunately, I don't seem to be quite clever enough to do that. And I'm having terrible trouble with making my alternative reality consistent.
You're finding it really difficult to create a world like that? What is it that's challenging? And I'm asking you as a complete never written a book novice.
Yeah, well, you have to be consistent, because it's so jarring and so annoying. And so you have to have so much backstory in your head. But then, having come up with all this backstory, it's very tempting to throw it at people in big stodgy lumps, just to sort of prove how much work you've done, and you can't do that either. So it's a funny thing. You have to have done all this thinking and constructed this absolutely flawless thing, but then take it for granted that everybody understands it and just sort of mention it here and there. I'm finding that, well, because I do my writing in an hour and a half in the mornings, I'm not dedicating enough time to construct a proper parallel thing. I think you'd have to go away and think about it for 5 years first. And so what I'm doing is sort of writing down a story, and every couple of hundred words I think, oh no, that's wrong. And if I am creating this made up festival, I have to go back and change everything else, and then that would be the day before and they'd have done this. And I'm not explaining it well at all, but
no, I get it. Yeah,
it's just a big project and I can see that either I'll give up on it and just write a straight story, or I'll write this one and it will be useless, but it will have got my backstory sorted. And I'm not quite sure what's going to happen.
And then maybe you can go on and write another one because you've already put the backstory in there, so you don't need to think about it anymore.
That's right. But yeah, I think there's a certain amount of time that has to go into the backstory.
How long does it normally take you to write something?
A couple of years. I write very slowly.
Do you do a set number of words today, or you just do a day, or do you just do an hour and a half and see what happens?
Yeah, that's right. I just get up in the morning and turn the computer on and see what happens, more or less. That seems to work best for me. I've tried every method because, of course, writing's really hard, and so you'll do anything to avoid it. You'll read articles on how you should do it and mess around and check yourself on Goodreads, which just leads to despair and humiliation and,
Does it? Why?
Oh, well, I think most people are like this. You'll skim through the 99 loved it reviews and focus on the 1 star from some asshole who didn't bother to read it, or it wasn't what they hoped, or then fester about that for days.
Do you still do that? Is that difficult?
No, I don't. I have learned. So I tend to, a book comes out and you have to do a certain amount of publicity, and then I think about it as little as I possibly can and do almost nothing on social media and accept that I'm not going to build my brand that way, but I'm much happier.
When your first book came out, how long did it take from when you started writing it to getting it published? What was the publishing process, right? And then having to go on publicity tours or do that kind of stuff, that must be so alien for you. You're a country girl, a country vet. You're quite a private person. That must have been challenging.
It's a funny thing. I met a lovely quote by a British writer called Matt Haig a few years ago, and he said that the problem is just that to write a good book you have to be a super sensitive, rather neurotic introvert, and then to publicize a book you have to have a skin like a rhinoceros and be incredibly extroverted, and it's really hard to get the balance right.
How long did it take you? When did you start your first book?
The first one that got published.
Yeah.
Crikey, it was probably the 4th or 5th thing I'd written, but I started it and it instantly felt different. Although it's rather amateur when I read it now, I felt like I'd got my turn of phrase sorted and it felt right. I thought, oh yes, this is how I write, and away I went. Probably after a year, I'd written about 3/4 of it, and I submitted it at that stage, and it was accepted. So yeah, it probably took me 18 months to write.
Which one was that? Was that
Dinner at Rosie's?
Dinner at Rosie's. Okay. So in that one, was that the one where there were the twins?
No,
brother and sister. Which one was that?
That was the Pretty Delicious Cafe.
Where did you get that idea from?
I'm not sure, and I'm not actually sure I pulled it off. The premise was that they were sort of slightly telepathic twins. And again, I meant that one to be rather more mystical and magical than it came out. I find that even though I like the idea, it doesn't feel real enough, and I keep writing bits and then going, nah, that wouldn't happen, turning it back to normal. But I'm not sure where I first got the idea, but I'd sort of been playing around with it since I was about 15. Just
Right.
wouldn't it be fun if telepathy was a thing, and how might it work, and if you weren't a new age person who was all into flowers and crystals, how would you manage it, and wouldn't it be a bit embarrassing?
I thought it was a really interesting. When you published that first one, what happened then? You had to go on a tour, did you? Or
No, book tours don't really exist now. Well, unless you're Jodie Picoult or somebody terribly famous. These days, publishers pretty much tell you to embrace Twitter and wave you goodbye.
Do they really?
Yeah, well, more or less. Yeah, that it's a real. We'll buy a lot of manuscripts and not pay very much for any of them, and some of them will do well and some won't, and we won't invest very much. And it's not that they're all a pack of wankers. It's just that publishing has shrunk, and most people are 3 or 4 people working out of a cupboard somewhere and publishing these long lists of books, and they just can't do any sort of individual attention.
Isn't that interesting? Because Kindle's changed the whole landscape of publishing completely, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. So it used to be a little bit glamorous, and you used to be sort of put up and wined and dined and lunched, but now I think you have to be important enough not to need it before you get it.
You sent your manuscript off to a Kiwi publishing house.
No, I sent it to Allen and Unwin in Australia because they allowed electronic submissions, and that seemed a lot less scary. They said no to the book that I sent them, but it was the nicest rejection letter I've ever had in my life. They said, terrible idea, beautifully written, go do something else.
Actually.
And it was so sweet, because that was sort of why I submitted it. It's like, crikey, I've spent quite a long time mucking around with this. If I'm no good, I better know now so I can get on with something more useful. Yeah,
so when you said earlier that when you sat down to write that book, you felt different. How did it feel different? You said the turn of phrase was different. You felt like you'd nailed it. What was different about it?
I stopped. I think I just wrote it in the first person and pretended that I was saying it. And I said it the way that I would say it, rather than thinking that I'm not terribly interesting, so I'd better try and be a little bit more impressive and a little bit more grandiose, and which of course you can't pull off consistently because it's not you. So yeah. It was a lovely feeling. It was a lovely feeling when it clicked, and I thought, oh yes, yeah, exactly.
So is it autobiographical at all, or is it just that you're that character, or that character's based around you?
Crikey. Well, the 4 novels that I've written, they're all written in the first person, and they're all written by somebody who says and does exactly what I would do in that situation, which makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, as somebody's going to realise eventually that these heroines are all one person. So
she's very sweet. She's very gentle, that heroine.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So let's go back to the vet side of things and growing up on a farm. So did you grow up in the same area?
Yes. I grew up on the farm that we live on now. So that was one thing that I did change in Two Shakes. I made it my husband's farm and not ours, mostly because I felt that I could reproduce my husband and kids like 100% because they couldn't really do anything about it, and they probably weren't going to sack me. But I didn't want to do that to anybody else. So I didn't want to put mum and dad in as photographs of themselves. And
yeah, and yes, your sister-in-law.
Of course she's made up. Like, of course, ghastly sister-in-law.
When I was reading it, knowing that you'd change names and change characters and everything, I'm like, I wonder if there is anybody like that, and whether anybody's reading it going, she's talking about me there.
No, she's a composite of everybody who's pissed me off for the last 10 years. So. Yeah. Well, of course, the thing is that in real life, there aren't very many truly dreadful people, but it's terribly boring if everybody's delightful, and you have to have someone a bit nasty.
Where do you get your ideas from for the novels? I mean, the Two Shakes was based around your life, and for anybody that hasn't read it yet, it's written like a daily diary. So
yeah, well, I wrote down every day what had happened yesterday. So
that was your writing for the morning, was it?
Yeah, exactly. It was so much easier than writing a novel. It's just, not trying to worry about a story arc and how the characters were going to fit together. And yeah.
Was the wedding real?
No, it wasn't. I had to have, I thought, some sort of big thing to happen. So I planned that when I started, and then I'd sort of changed my mind by the time I got there, but it didn't matter. The
ideas for your stories, so that was a story that was woven into real life, but the ideas for the stories in the other 4, how did you come up with those?
You develop a bit of an ear for funny things that people say for a start, and tend to borrow things and slot them in and give them to other people. And I borrow settings all the time from just what I've been doing. Yeah, if it's a horrible drizzly day, then that's probably how the next scene starts. And
okay. And the characters in there, because being a country vet, I can imagine that a lot of the characters are based on, or composites of people that you met through what you do every day.
Well, that was actually rather disappointing, because of course all the really best stories you can't use at all because the people would just sue you. Exactly. And I did have a terrible shock last week, a very nice woman I know, she rang me up and she said, I've got two questions. One is, what is your recipe for good weed spray that kills Tradescantia? And she said, and the other one is that absolute asshole farmer, was that, John Smith? Oh God, I didn't think anyone would ever recognize him. So that's concerning. My hope is that this person can't actually read and wouldn't anyway, but
yeah. So in that case where you have, let's just change topics completely here. Let's go to the vetting side of it, because there's a few characters in a few of your books that, like the novel about the vet and your and Two Shakes as well. There's a couple of characters that are really vile to their vets. Tell me about them. You don't have to name names, obviously, but tell me about what's actually happened in those scenarios.
Oh, you mean are they real, and are there people like that?
Well, yeah, partly, but also what was the incident that caused you to write about them?
Well, I mean, you do the odd, absolutely revolting carving, and every practice has got one or two people that every time, someone puts their head into the office and say, who's going to go to that place? It's, oh, Beck's not, no, it's terrible. Yeah, it's not so much that, you need to write down these traumatic events and describe these horrible people to get them off your chest. It's just more fun to write about nasty people, like always. So you remember the bloke that was a bit of a pig, and you amplify it and make him much worse than he actually was and exaggerate it because that's more fun. And yeah, it's just fun.
There was an old lady whose cat needed putting down and she was so upset, and the vet in the novel had to go round and take the cat. That's the heartbreaking side of being a vet, isn't it?
Yeah, it is sad but nice. Yeah. I mean, it's lovely when people love their animals like that, and yeah, it's gorgeous. The really hard stuff is the stuff that things didn't go very, very well, or it died and you didn't think it should, and then you lie awake and wonder what you should have done differently. People assume that it's the putting animals to sleep that's really hard and heartbreaking, and I don't find that it is. I mean, not that I rub my hands together and go, yes, I killed 3 cats, it was a great day. But yeah, that's not the stuff that I lie awake at night and feel bad about.
It's the ones where you just, because there was a part in Two Shakes where you said you were in the dentist chair and you recognized the look on his face, which was just, oh crap, this is
going really badly. Yeah. So I didn't think this was going to happen like that. Yep. Yes, exactly. That's the bad bit of the job. That I embarked on this and I didn't really think it through, and now I'm in the middle of it and I'm going to have to try and sort it out.
Tell me about one of those. Which one of those is stuck in your mind the most?
I remember one particularly awful. It was a cow with a prolapsed uterus in a hideous mud puddle on a terrible day, and person helping, I think she weighed about 40 kilograms and she was about 4 foot tall, and like sort of no practical help whatsoever. Didn't go right. What had happened is that the uterus had come out and then all of the intestines had followed it and they were inside the mass, so there was this enormous, as big as a 44-gallon drum, sort of organ all full of stuff. And so I thought, okay, right, well, I can't get it back in. And I opened up the uterus and then sort of tried to shovel everything else back in, and muddy and bleedy and awful. And in hindsight, you think, why did I put that poor animal through? Why didn't I just say, no, go home and get the gun? And you sort of don't, and you try a little bit, and then you try a little bit of something else, and then you have that, what's it called, that bias where you feel, I've been here for 2 hours, I can't give up now. And there are a few of those. You get better at them. You don't get into so many of those situations after a few years, but it still happens.
Right. It's an experience thing that stops you getting into those situations?
Mostly, yeah. And carvings are the worst for it. I'll just try this, I'll just try that. Oh, that didn't work either. And now I'm tired, and now I'm not making good decisions. And yeah, you still get one of those every couple of years. And yeah, why did I embark on this? And whose best interest was this?
One of the things that fascinated me in your book when you were writing the list of what you achieve, and particularly at shearing time, when you've got to bake, you just spend all day making food for the shearers, and you've still got to look after the kids, and then you'll go out into the garden and do stuff, and then you got to go out into the farm and sort out with the animals and feed the cattle because you had no feed at the time, and all the. How do you manage to sleep or do anything other than work around the farm and look after the kids and everything? How do you get it all done?
Well, I mean, you don't get it all done often, but but it's amazing how much you get through if you just start and keep going. It was a little bit like that today, you know. Got the smoke over the shearers and fed out, and got back and got lunch and into town and changed a tyre and got some gravel on the back of the ute so that I can redo the driveway, and got Blair's rugby photos and set my cat trap on the way home. And
is that wild cats, is it? Feral
yes, yes, definitely. I'm not some horrible sadistic person who goes around trapping the neighbourhood pets.
I'm kind of aware that there's a lot of people that aren't from the country and aren't from Australia and New Zealand, so we'll be able to relate to what's going on, but some people can't. So talk to me about the shearing. What happens in the shearing? So smoko, because if you're American or English, you're not going to understand what smoko is.
Yeah. Well, they start at 7:00 every morning and they do 4 2-hour runs. So they go 7 to 9 and then they have smoko morning tea at 9:00. And then 9:30 to 11:30 and then lunch and then 2 more runs in the afternoon. So today they had, what did they have? Sausage roll and chocolate cake for morning smoko, and shepherd's pie and garlic bread and coleslaw for lunch, and apricot shortcake and cheese scones for afternoon.
And you're expected to bake all that as
yeah. I did a little bit of stuff for tomorrow, so I've got the sausage pie and the lemon cake and stuff, and I've got a bit more to do tomorrow.
Do you get any writing done at this time of year, or is that just out the window?
Yeah, because the writing sort of 5:30 in the morning. Yeah.
And it's now 9:00 at night your time.
I'll go to bed soon.
Wow.
No, today has been a little bit crazy. It's had lots of stuff to fit in. And a dear friend, my flatmate from university, came to stay last night. And so of course we set up a bit late. And
the full moon, but you got the
that's right,
last night, which is so lucky.
And because I'm a moron and I never follow any current affairs, I missed the entire thing. So
Did you?
Yes, but the moon does look gorgeous. Although I don't know if it's a real thing or not, but at yoga on Monday night, the instructor, who's quite sort of new age, she was explaining that with this, moon, probably we'd all feel a little bit fragile and a little bit fraught. And my goodness, at work on Tuesday, we were the most pitiful bunch you've ever met. We all had our feelings hurt and felt that nobody loved us and it just wasn't fair. And so I don't know if that was the moon or not.
You were talking in the book about how you have to give a talk on something at an annual conference. Is that real? No, you made that up?
Yes, but it's not a conference. We're a branch of a big practice and they run a continuing education evening. So everyone has to get up and talk about something vaguely interesting for a few minutes.
Do you find that scary?
Yes, it's dreadful.
Because I did wonder about that as I'm reading it. I'm like, I wonder if she actually gets anxiety about this, because
I'm not a confident public speaker. I actually forced myself to. They offered a Toastmasters course through work a couple of years ago, and it was the last thing in the world I wanted to do. But I thought, right, I need it. I hate it. I hate the idea so much that I must do it. So that helped a little bit.
How did you go with it? What was it like?
Actually, it was hilarious. The people who came to teach us, they were the strangest bunch. There's a tall, thin young fellow who was all Adam's apple and a sort of pedantic older gentleman, and it was all just a bit funny, but it was good practice.
Did you learn a lot? Did you get a lot from it?
Yeah. It was rather informal. There were half a dozen of us from different clinics who'd all thought for one reason or another that we really should make ourselves do this. And of course, so you're completely among friends and you're giving these little 5-minute speeches, and it's so scary. And so it's just nice to push through that and realise that you're not going to die. And
what's your next move from here? So you're doing this teen or young adults novel. Are you going to be doing something else as well?
Oh, I'm sure I will. I really enjoy writing. Well, in the same way that you enjoy going for long runs, you like having done it.
Yeah, when you've finished it feels good.
Exactly. I'm sure that I'll keep writing things, but I have written one or two things under contract and very much not enjoyed the pressure. Doesn't pay very well, and I resent having to treat it like a real job when there's not really a financial incentive for it. So I'd much rather just treat it as a fun hobby that, you know, I'm much more productive if I'm enjoying it rather than resenting it. Yeah, and then see if someone will publish it at the end.
I was going to ask you about that, because when you said, you know, you sit down and you do an hour and a half every day, I know, like, I'll do guest posts for magazines and I get the biggest shits when it comes to deadline time, because I've got to
That's awful. Yeah,
something like, I hate it. So
Yeah,
if I
it's
could
really
just get
hard.
up in the morning and you know, go, right, I'm going to write about this today, or I'm going to talk about this today, or I can have a conversation with somebody, but to sit down and actually write about a topic, I struggle. Well, if I tell myself I have to do anything, I just won't enjoy it.
Yeah, I know. Deadlines are such tricky things, because if you don't have any time pressure, then it's very easy to not do anything, but they're so unenjoyable. So yeah.
So how do you get because I couldn't do it. I couldn't go, right, an hour and a half a day, I'm going to do this. I might do it for a few weeks and then it'd trail off. How have you managed to keep that going?
Well, slowly and laboriously, but it's the thing, you can't do it with willpower, because that's just too hard. Like, willpower doesn't work, so you just have to make it a habit, and you're out of bed and staggering across the carpet and putting on the kettle before you think about it. And I find that I have to trick myself as well. So, like, it doesn't matter if I hate this in 5 minutes, I'll stop. And of course you never do, you know, you've always got a little bit into it and a little bit interested, and I find that I have to not put very much pressure on myself.
Right. Yeah.
Trick myself into sitting down, and then I'm all right.
So how many words do you get done? Is there like an average number of words? Is it some days you do lots and some days you do none at all?
Yeah, I'm about a 300 word a day sort of a person, so a page-ish. At times in my life when I've had, you know, writing mornings, I won't let myself get up until I've done 500 words, and if I do 1,000, I'm really stoked, but I would never achieve more than that. I'm certainly not one of these people. You know, I belong to various writers groups on Facebooks, and people say, 5,000 words today. Oh, good God, how did you do that? Yeah. And everyone does that differently, of course. Some people write a little bit and polish it, and other people write a rough first draft and go
what
from
do you do? Do you just write and then keep the story going and then go back?
No, I polish it. I have to, I have to like the previous paragraph and think it sounds about right before I'll go on to the next, because it's very easy to fall into the trap of just endlessly titivating and polishing, and you do have to force yourself to keep going a bit. I expect that when I submit something, there'll be an odd little query and they'll move a few commas, and that wasn't the experience I got back. Yeah, it'll be good when you've rewritten half of it. I was absolutely floored.
Wow.
But yeah, I do like to polish things really carefully. I suspect I would make much better progress if I made myself write 1,000 words before I was allowed to look back and fix anything. But
you got to go with what works for you as well.
Yeah, that's right. And something I find is, if it's a bit crap and it doesn't get across what I meant it to get across, and it doesn't feel right, I find it really, really hard to go on, because I'm a bit bored.
Right.
I like to get it to the point where I read it and go, oh, yes, that's what I meant. Yes, perfect. Whether anyone else thinks that, who would know? But
what is your favourite book that you've written?
That I've written?
That you've written, yeah. Which one was your favourite? Which one was hardest and which one was the easiest to write?
The first one was the easiest, because it was all just so exciting and so much fun, and I just wrote in any second that wasn't occupied by something else, you know, for hours and hours and hours on end. The second one was the hardest. It's probably my favourite, but it was the hardest. I had an unrealistic deadline, and an editor or a publisher, when I kept trying to say, I can't do this, I can't do that. You know, the kids were toddlers and I was so tired, and I was trying to do stuff and I was on call, and I think I wasn't forceful enough, and she sort of kept saying, no, you'll be right. And I actually had a little bit of a breakdown and had to have a spell on antidepressants after that one.
Yeah.
I just got myself into such a pickle. Just got so tired and took it all so terribly seriously when, of course, who cares? It's a novel. Yeah, so that one
what
was really hard.
what was the first one? Just for people.
Dinner at Roses.
Dinner at Rosie's, and the second one was
chocolate cake for breakfast. Yeah, so I found it very, very hard. I got so tired, and then I had this deadline, and so I would sit down and sort of struggle for hours and hours, and of course accomplish nothing because I was miserable and exhausted, and but lacking the perspective to say I'm going to put this away for a week and then it'll go a bit better. Yeah. So
how long was there between finishing Chocolate Cake for Breakfast and starting the next one?
Oh, I can't remember. A few months, I think. I was quite flat after I'd finished that, and quite sad about the whole thing, and just a bit silly. I sort of look back and shake my head and think, oh gosh, it's a shame that you lost your perspective like that, dear, but oh well, never mind.
So is there still a negative association with that book, or do you feel okay about it?
I like the book now. Yeah, I did like it when I'd finished it. I left that publisher. I just didn't want to work with Lady anymore. And they're a wonderful company. But in hindsight, it wasn't really anybody else's fault. I mean, how were they to know I was twisting myself up into a knot and, suffering in silence from across the sea? They couldn't see that, But you get silly and you feel that people should know these things. So I got sort of resentful and quiet, and then sort of lost my rag about things that didn't matter at all, and rang the poor woman up and shouted at her down the phone, which must have perplexed her quite a lot. So.
And did you just go to one publisher, or did you send it out to quite a few?
I had an agent, and when the next manuscript was done, I asked her to submit it to different people just to see if we had any more options, just because it wasn't particularly that I was still feeling resentful. I just thought, I'm ashamed of the way that I acted, and yeah, I don't want to keep having to remember it, and I want to start again and be professional rather than sort of become somebody's best friend and then have it all go.
Was your experience now different to what it was before? Is the experience of writing a book different? Yes,
I don't enjoy it as much as I did, and that makes me sad. It's just that first, well, I suppose it's like falling in love with somebody, they're so exciting for a while, and then, you still like them a few years later, but they don't make your heart beat faster. So it's a little bit more of a job and less of a passion project than it was.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's been really lovely to meet you.
You too. Lovely to meet you. Thank you. Bye.